Welcome to The Criminologist, the podcast dedicated to educating and entertaining our listeners. This week, bringing you a special American Probation and Parole Association edition. As the voice of the community corrections industry, APPA serves as the field's leading professional membership association. In addition to their U.S. members, the American Probation and Parole Association is supported by international members who are actively involved in strengthening community corrections work in their own countries. APPA's International Relations Committee aims to connect community corrections professionals around the world to inspire and share insights from their unique experiences and best practices. Welcome to this special APPA episode of The Criminologist. And now, welcome your host, Joseph Arvidsson.
Hello and welcome to episode 180 of the Criminologist Podcast. Happy to have you all with us today. I met our next guest, Helena Pombares, while I was in New York City recently for the American Probation and Parole Association's annual Training Institute. Helena was presenting at the conference, and since she currently hails from London, I decided to make her part of our ongoing series with the International Relations Committee, in which we're really trying to shine a light on the great work that our international partners are doing. Helena, who may be unfamiliar to many of you, brings a fresh perspective by marrying architecture with the criminal justice system. Specializing in prison architecture for over 15 years, her approach is rooted in the innovative concept of salutogenic design, a method that emphasizes health and well-being in the built environment. Helena's work has taken her to the forefront of prison design. Today, we are going to talk about her global efforts to spearhead sustainable, gender-responsive, and trauma-informed custodial facilities. But what does all that mean in practice? How do architectural choices affect inmates' rehabilitation journey? What global inspiration shaped the vision of a prison, not just as a holding facility, but as a place of positive transformation? All these questions and more were explored in our conversation. For understanding the very essence of salutogenic architecture, by diving into its real-world impacts on both the incarcerated and the surrounding community, our conversation with Helena sheds light on an often overlooked aspect of the justice system. And for those curious about the challenges she faced or inspired by international practices, we touch on that too. I encourage you all to listen with an open mind. This episode reminds us that change can come from unexpected avenues, and sometimes the key to effective rehabilitation lies in the very walls around us. Please enjoy my conversation with Helena Pombares, and I will see you all on the other side. Well, welcome to the show, Helena. So glad we were able to connect after meeting in New York City recently at the American Probation and Parole Association conference. Why don't we kick things off by you telling our listeners a little bit about yourself, what your pathway was like, what your journey was like to lead you to the chapter in your life that we're going to talk about today, and then we'll dive into some of these fascinating questions.
Hi, Joe. It's my pleasure to be here with you. So I am an architect. That was my first degree. And I never for a second thought I would end up in the criminal justice system. So once I finished my degree, I was offered a job with the government, my government, Angola. So I started working with them, and when the moment came for them to do some work in their prisons, I volunteered myself because none of my colleagues wanted to do it. So I had no idea what to expect. I had no idea where to go. At that point, I have never been inside or near any prison. So I thought, well, how difficult can that be? And how wrong was I? So I said, yeah, I'm doing it. And that was a shock for me when I got there. And I started questioning myself and my ability to actually do anything to do with prisons, because I thought I'm not prepared to deal with my clients. As an architect, we tend to know our clients and their lifestyle, and it's in civil life, if I can say that, it's so much easier. We ask, oh, so you like socializing with other people, having people at home? Do you prefer to be alone? But in prison, it's not like that, right? So I didn't know nothing about my clients, and that led me to eventually pursue a master's degree in prison architecture. When I found that, I took straight away. And while doing the master's, I was still thinking that was not giving me the answers that I needed to find out what led my clients in that case, or what led people to commit crimes, and how could we change that, and how could we better serve society, always having into consideration the crimes of the people committed, but at the same time being more humane, because the places I visited were not humane at all. And without noticing, once again, I end up doing a criminology and criminal justice degree. So that's how I end up here, doing what I do.
We have a lot in common as far as you were rattling off your relentless pursuit to learn more and start collecting those various degrees. I was not even aware of the fact that there was a master's degree in prison architecture, but it sounds like even that advanced degree program wasn't meeting what you saw, at least as the need out there. So of course you followed up with a degree in criminology to learn more about your customers. I love how you put it that way. That was amazing. And then to clarify, you are currently in London, but you're Portuguese. So what did that look like? How did you end up in the United Kingdom?
Okay, so I was born in Portugal, never lived in Portugal because my parents are from Angola, in southwest of Africa. And they left Angola at some point in their lives to escape the war. And that's how I was born in Portugal. But then eventually we went back to Angola, so I never lived in Portugal. I grew up in Angola, and that's all I know as a country, as a place where I am from. And I end up in London because of the master's degree and criminology degree after that.
Oh, I see. Okay. When you were speaking about your first sort of apprehension about working in a prison, it reminded me I interviewed somebody from Australia just a few weeks ago, Paul McNamara, who has an education background. He's a school teacher. And it reminded me of his story when he applied for that first job and sort of had this, oh my gosh, what did I get myself into moment working at a correctional facility, which I'm sure, as you said, you experienced as well. Let's roll up our sleeves and get into sort of your specialty. I was not familiar with this term. I'm going to ask you to describe it to our listeners, but what is the definition of, and I hope I don't mispronounce it here, salutogenic architecture? And how does that diverge from, for lack of a better term, traditional prison design? Again, getting back to perhaps what you learned about the shortcomings of that traditional prison architecture approach.
Mm-hmm. So the term salutogenic is a portmanteau of two Latin words, salus, that means health, and genesis, which is origin. So salutogenesis means origin of health, basically. So the word was coined by Aaron Antonovsky in the late 70s. And the salutogenic theory focus on the guide of health promotion through health lifestyle and focusing on stress reduction, as well as coping with factors that causes stress. So everything that causes stress is a factor that will be addressed within the salutogenic theory. So with that background information in mind, we can conclude that salutogenic architecture is simply an architecture that promotes health and well-being, right? And for all the users of any space. So in the case of prisons, that is a very particular case, because more or less we all use salutogenic architecture when designing any other space. But in the case of prisons, is a different story. So it's a quite new concept. It's well known that the way prisons used to be built was to punish inmates, right? What would consequently and unintentionally punish staff, family members of inmates, family members of staff, and then the surrounding community, the society. That was just a domino effect. At the time, that was unnoticed, that domino effect that was affecting everybody. So today, architects, when designing carceral spaces, they know, or we know, that buildings can and will affect society in general. So we tend to build carceral spaces that will focus more on health and well-being. So salutogenic architecture is really and truly an umbrella that covers a number of aspects that lead to health and well-being of the users of that space, in a case prisons. And those factors are well known and very much well used in any other kind of architecture designs, such as the use of natural light and ventilation, use of greenery spaces, or what we call ecological biophilic design, the reduction of noise, that is extremely important in the case of jails and prisons, right? Because they're very noisy environments usually. Sustainability, in the ways that the days that we're living now with the global warming situation, it is so necessary. And in many countries, it's now a law that we all build sustainably. So most important of all is the sense of coherence of the building. Is what it gives to the users of the space, which is the core concept of the salutogenesis theory. So it's the sense of coherence reflects a person's view of life and their capacity to respond to stressful situations. So we need to have that into consideration when we build any space, especially prisons.
When you were giving that definition, I made a note of the term health and well-being, and it reminded me a lot of what I've been learning as far as the Norwegian prison approach. I know one of the things that I talk about on the show quite a bit when I talk about that Norwegian approach is they have what they refer to as their principle of normalcy. Their philosophy is the prison setting should be as normal, for lack of a better term, as the outside society is. It sounds like you're bringing some of that spirit into what you do. Is that what originally drew you into combining everything you knew about architecture with the justice system as you learned and evolved and started, sounds like, combining these two seemingly remote fields, architecture and criminology, but you saw a need there in the space that needed to be addressed? Is that, again, sort of what drew you into this?
That's exactly it. As I said, I end up in the justice sector without knowing where I was going. When I saw the very poor conditions of those places that I was visiting, I truly thought that is not right. I understand the people commit crimes and that can be sometimes it's just a mistake, but we all deserve a second chance. That's what I think. I know I'm talking in a very general way, but yes, I did feel that I should best serve my clients. I considered building prisons, my clients would be the people using that space. At the time, I was looking more into inmates, and with time, I realized that my clients were not only the inmates, but also the staff, working there, because they spend most of their day in there. And consequently, like it or not, everybody else around me. So it was a social responsibility for me as an architect to bring those two knowledges together and find, as you said, a normancy between life inside and life outside.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, we know the people inside will come out, right? And they will be our neighbors. So who do we want to be or to have as a neighbor? Someone that we can trust, or do we want to have someone that we can't even look, we have to be looking over our shoulders all the time? So that's what made me, pursue this knowledge.
I'm so fascinated to learn more about this and learn more about it in practice. I know you've talked about some of the themes of that salutogenic approach, but can you maybe highlight some of the main design principles of that architecture, again, particularly as it applies to prisons?
So the main design principles of salutogenic architecture is no more, no less than everything that will promote health and well-being. Right? So we should start with an architecture, and now talking specifically about prisons, we should start with an architecture that will not be confusing. Many years ago, centuries ago, we used to design a place that was purposely confusing, so people would not know where they were at, all the time, right? It's not the point now, because a confusing space, difficult to navigate, will exacerbate traumas and mental health issues that most people that end up in prison bring with them. So that is one thing, the first thing. And other things will be the size of spaces. It's very important to consider minimal dimensions, at least for cells, right? For rooms, we now have the Nelson Mandela rules that will help us with that, and many other rules to have those proportions right, because we don't have to have a cell where a person cannot even turn around because they are in between two walls. That is inhumane, and that will make the person literally go crazy, and which was the intention before, but not anymore. So another thing is hygienic areas. That is especially important in the case of women's prison. Ventilation and the amount of natural light inside the rooms or cells, or in common areas as well. The ability of the inmate control their own amount of light and ventilation they want in their own space. So create a normalized environment, literally just like a home-like feeling, where we can control things. We are in a space that mimics a familiar space. So with green spaces, contact with nature wherever possible. I know I'm talking about prisons, and there are other things to consider, but wherever possible, therapeutic spaces are very necessary. Things like normalized furniture, and just to bring a calm environment to the place.
As you were speaking, Helena, and you talked about the old sort of philosophy with prisons to be designed to be confusing. Even before you used that term, when you said it actually drove people crazy, it reminded me of a story that I used to tell my undergraduate students teaching corrections and focusing on some of the older American prisons here. Particularly, I want to say in the state of Pennsylvania, but they went out of their way to create that sense of isolation, up to and including, I used to tell my students there was a practice of the corrections officers would take off their shoes, take off their boots, and they would walk around simply wearing wool socks because they wanted to instill that sense of silence as a punishment and as a psychological sort of tool. Horrible tool, but that prison became known as the maniac maker. To your point about it drove people crazy, and it's just brutal, but also, I guess, inspiring how far we've come, because that was only about a century ago when that was the philosophy. As we know, that term penitentiary comes from penance. It was all about isolate folks, let them reflect on their sins, aka their offenses, and then that would naturally rehabilitate them. And as you said, that's a great mantra to have. All of these individuals are going to be someone's future neighbor. So how are you preparing them to be someone's future neighbor? Let's talk about some deliverables, some outcomes. Over the years, how have you seen implementation of this new philosophy around a more progressive architecture? How have you seen that positively impact the health, the well-being, and the rehabilitation of the residents?
So there are a number of studies that mention the benefits of carceral spaces using a more salutogenic approach, right? In those places, research and also the statistics show significantly lower numbers of staff sick leaves. The studies show less inmate visitation to the doctors, less confrontational situations between inmates and staff, which are situations caused by stress. So if inmates are not stressed and staff is not stressed, there's no need for confrontation. There's is a calm environment. And more important of all is the lower recidivism rates. So those studies show that there is a relation between this calmer environments, prison environments, and the lower recidivism rates in those particular areas. So inmates in those prisons are actually offered a more normalized life where they have more opportunities to learn and improve life skills, and they can then use those skills inside even to control their feelings, because if you have more to think than just, as you said just a minute ago, your sins, you learn to control your life better, right? So when they come out, they are more prepared to deal with life situations. And so those studies that I'm referring that show all these good things about or the relation between those things, they show the lower recidivism rates, and in some of those countries there is even what we call bed vacancies, right? Because there's less people committing crimes and coming back to prison. So I think we can see through research, we can see this happening, the implementation of salutogenic architecture impacting positively in general.
And I'm really glad that you've pointed this out a couple of times, Helena, that it's not just the benefits to the inmates or the residents, but it's also the staff benefits. That's one of the things that I always point out, talking about whether it's the Norwegian system or even more broadly speaking, this notion of dynamic security. It's a 2-for-1 because the staff members, as you said, have less stress, call in sick less, better self-care on the job. So it really is a win-win situation. Now, that being said, the devil's in the details when it comes to implementation. What are some challenges or resistance you faced trying to promote and implement this unique design approach in the justice sector?
Well, we know that prisons and jails are very complicated spaces to work on. So there is a main component that is security around these buildings, right? Is security of those inside, security of those outside. So it makes very difficult to accept changes. Because if we are doing what we're doing for years, for centuries, and is working, at least the most important thing is that we are not having anyone escaping from the prison, I better not try anything different because it's working. It's keeping people inside, right? and the outside is keeping people outside, those that need to be outside as well. So it is quite challenging to try to innovate design because stakeholders and decision makers are not willing, understandably though, I should say, are not willing to take the responsibility if anything goes wrong. It's totally understandable. We use academic research to inform the practice, and academic research has been done for so many years, but is also another difficulty for people to accept the research as a tool to inform the practice. We know what we're talking about because we work in here every day. You don't. You sit in front of the books. And again, I repeat, it's understandable that. But and that was more done years ago. Now we can see a little bit of a change. Now we can see people are more open to say, you know what, maybe looking a little bit more into the research will help. Maybe because you take the time to understand what we do. So maybe that, but the tendency is definitely not only from stakeholders, but also architects in general, to this tendency to overlook the research or even opposed to that slightly. So research and new tendencies, new designs, is the resistance that I see the most.
Helena, the irony is never lost on me that corrections professionals whose job it is to change folks are sometimes they themselves the most rigid individuals when it comes to change. I see a lot of that, even more broadly speaking, just in the realm of evidence-based practices and trying to connect that research to practice. And again, the devil's in the details with implementation. But speaking of evidence-based practices, I know that's all about creating something more than a one-size-fits-all approach. Talk about gender-responsive facilities. That's really particularly intriguing to me when we talk about gender-responsive issues in corrections. Can you discuss the significance of this and how that salutogenic design addresses the different needs of, for example, a male and a female inmate?
Sure. So it is known that within the prison population, women have more and completely different criminogenic needs than men, right? So, for instance, according to UK statistics, 53% of women in prison are survivors or victims of emotional, physical, and sexual abuse, either from their childhood or during their adulthood. Right? The same research, the same statistics that is from the government says that 7 in 10 women in prison are survivors of domestic abuse. All those numbers make women in prison 5 times more likely to have mental ill health than any other woman in the general population. In fact, those women, 80% of those women that are incarcerated have more than one mental disorder. So all those women suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, depression. They are more likely to self-harm because of that than men are. And on top of all of that, they bring with them drugs and alcohol addiction. They are mothers that leave their children behind when they come to prison. And that on its own is a very traumatic and stressful situation for the women. Not that it's not for the men, but research shows that it's more traumatic for the women, for the mothers, than for the fathers, right? So when we are talking about designing institution for women, a prison for women, we have to have a space that the environment will not exacerbate all these traumas that women bring with them, right? Poor light is a lack of hygienic facilities. I mentioned that before. The noise around, all of that will bring back all those thoughts, all those feelings. So it's very difficult to be in a female prison. That's why people say, oh, it's easier to deal with male prisoners than women prisoners. Yes, because women bring a lot of traumas with them that need to be addressed. So a salutogenic design has the power, let's say, to promote mental and physical well-being. So using that, we will create spaces that will promote a safe and calm environment. So the sense of coherence that we spoke about is very important here when dealing with, when designing a prison, a female prison. It is crucial. It's important for men prisons, but it's crucial here in female prisons, right? So biophilic design is another thing. The use of colors that influences quite a lot in women. The natural light and ventilation necessary for both. The size of socialization areas are very important. Why? Because women have the tendency to socialize more than men. Women heal by talking, by sharing their experiences, while men withdraw and they don't talk. Women talk. They get together and talk and cry together. That's what they do. They're more nurturers. So we need to provide those spaces that are safe spaces, calm spaces for them to deal with those situations. So right there is completely different from the way we would design salutogenic space for men, right? Another thing that we need to have into consideration, and salutogenic design helps quite a lot, is providing a healthy familiar space where childcare responsibilities can be considered. Is very important, either for those mothers in places where that is allowed, to have their children, their babies, with them for that period of time they are allowed, or even in some places it happen, they can the children can come and spend the weekend or some days with their mother. Again, I'll repeat, this varies from place to place, and we need to address all this. But it is important that a salutogenic design will help us, will allow us, if I can say, to provide for all of that. So, in a very simple way and very important to say that salutogenic architecture will help us provide a home space, a home feel space that is safe and trauma-free.
I have taken to telling folks lately when I run into still those small pockets of resistance around evidence-based practice, I'll try to share with them that, hey, listen, I've been blessed to literally travel the globe talking about risk needs responsivity, and I'll tell them stories about how when I hear that term criminogenic need translated into a variety of languages, it tells me, okay, this is not the flavor of the month. We're on to something here. This is a global approach. And it just warmed my heart just now when an architecture used the words criminogenic need to me without any prompting. So again, it tells me, folks, this is a holistic global framework that we are embracing here. So thank you for inspiring me there, Helena. Helena, I was just in a training literally this week when we were talking about a prison that we have here in Minnesota. We have one female correctional facility in the state, and up until relatively recently, I want to say, it was the only correctional facility in the country. It didn't have a fence around the perimeter. And finally, it was just enough pushback, and I think there was some concerns, but they finally put a fence around that prison. But the ironic thing was the community members did not want the fence to go up because they didn't want this sort of remembrance or reminder of the eyesore of razor wire and all that kind of thing. Because I remember going to the prison in the past, and you would pull up and almost think to yourself, I must have punched in the wrong address because this looks like an elementary school or something. It doesn't look like a correctional facility. talk about maybe how prison design not only benefits, we've talked about the benefits to the inmate, obviously, and we discussed briefly the benefits of the staff members as far as their well-being, but is there a consideration of the surrounding community as well in this new prison design approach?
Most definitely. So we can look into, in a way, for instance, when we have a nice building and within a community, everybody tends to look after things when they're nice, right? So if we have this nice building that will not only sit there, but will also be useful for the community. In a sense, for instance, there is a particular project that I cannot mention which one it is, but there is a particular project that we worked on, and the community will be served by the prison. So we will have, they have a horticultural and farming space that will serve the community. So whatever they produce inside will be for the use of the residents, but they will also sell that as a more cheaper price than supermarkets to the local community. That will bring the community closer to the prison and will break that stigma, because there is a huge stigma around prisons. So what you just said, that is amazing that the community didn't want the barbed wire around, because that stigma was already being broken. What is amazing. But in certain places, it's not like that. People are scared to even go in front of the street. So if you have a nice place where we have picnic areas around, where families can go and spend nice time together in those areas, where we can another project, another prison is not a project, it's actually a prison that is built. What they do serve in the community is they have electric car charging points. So anyone in a community can come and charge their cars in there. Obviously, we always look into the security point of view, but those it looks small little things, but they are actually huge to bring the community together, and the prison will then affect positively the surrounding community, the immediate community.
I just love that philosophy. Regular listeners of the show know that one of my mantras that I'm always preaching is this notion that there's no them, there's only us. We need to get out of this binary us versus them, good guys, bad guys. And it sounds like you're doing that by tearing down some of those walls, some of those, figuratively speaking at least, some of those walls, some of those perceptions, some of those biases about these monsters that we just warehouse in the hinterland to serve their prison sentence. And you're addressing that and taking down, again, some of that bias against justice-involved individuals. I mentioned that we ran into each other in New York City at the American Probation and Parole Association. Let's talk about the global perspective of your work here. I know your team at Pick Everard collaborates with organizations worldwide. Are there any international prison designs or practices that you've particularly been inspired by, or that inform your work?
Well, we all, in general, look up to the Norwegian way of doing things. I did as well from the beginning of my career. But with time, I started thinking it can't be one size fits all. Why does it work for the Norwegian region, and will that work for us here? So I started doing more and more research, and all our projects are informed by research. And I got to the conclusion that even though those projects inspired me, inspire many other professionals in the correction system, but we need to look into how we can, or what we can take from those projects. We need to start looking into the population we are going to serve, what the design looks like for us here, how how it will work. We always have into consideration successful prison designs and practices around the world, obviously. And we try to understand how they do things, how well those things work for them. And we try to accommodate that with our reality. With the reality that we are working at that point. So it is important that we always keep in mind the surrounding community. It's not the building only, but the culture of the surrounding community is very important that we look into that as well. So all our projects are really unique in the sense that we need to respect the surroundings, right? We need to respect the population that we're serving. So definitely prisons designed with a more salutogenic approach, like the Norwegian criminal justice system, are taken into consideration. Yeah, always inspiring, definitely. But I cannot put a finger on one specific project because after that, many other countries followed their path. Again, accommodating to their own realities and to what works for them and for their own prisoner population and community, surrounding communities. So that's exactly what we do as well.
I know that as part of your mission, your aim is to share knowledge and learn from other professionals. Again, I know we were at the American Probation and Parole Association recently doing just that. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to see your presentation. Could you maybe share either a little bit of what you presented at APPA or just simply share a success story where collaborating learning led to an innovative design or maybe a practice in the justice sector?
Sure. I think the successful stories happen every day in the sense that we use the knowledge that we gain from other successful stories and what we see in the visits and what we do. And most important, we use the research to innovate our designs, right? So every project that we are involved in is a product of this shared knowledge between professionals. What I shared at APPA was one side of what we do, that is research. So we offer and we do work a lot with the sense of coherence, and we do the sense of coherence questionnaire with staff. That is for us to understand us and also the governors, prison governors, those that work with that, to understand what is not so good in what we're doing, where could we improve, what is great, and particularly if we are moving on to a better solution. What is that going to be? How is that going to look like? We are all scared to make changes, no doubts about it. But in the prison setting, even more. So that's what I was sharing APPA, our sense of coherence questionnaire that we use with, we help prison governors and other stakeholders to use with staff. We actually had a mock questionnaire, and it was very interesting. We used the space where we were at, and it was very, very interesting to see the answers of the participants.
With the evolving landscape of criminal justice reform, and you've clearly demonstrated a great understanding of the nuances of rehabilitation. Where do you see the future of prison architecture heading, Helena? If I have you back on the show in a year from now or 5 years from now, look into your crystal ball and tell me what you think we might be talking about on the horizon.
I hope we are going to see more salutogenic prison architectures around the world. There is no one size. There is no one way of designing a salutogenic. No, it is an approach. It is a concept. So I'm sure we will all get there eventually. Obviously, at different times, because we all work different places. We all have different realities. What happens here in England, in the UK? Well, I should say what happens in England may not happen as quick in other places, even in Scotland, or the other way around. So let alone from country to country, right? But we all going to get there eventually. That's what I see. I really see that with this multidisciplinary team of people working in the justice system, corrections are going to be better with time, for sure.
I could not agree more. There's a lot of really groundbreaking and fascinating things going on in corrections right now. And to your point, I think it's because we have widened that lens of contributors, for lack of a better term, to include not just practitioners. We're also seeing the inclusion, of course, of those with lived experiences. And now, of course, including architects. Why not, right? Again, it's all about the greater good. So it's a full team effort. Helena Pombares joining us all the way from London in the United Kingdom. Thank you so much, Helena. I'm glad I bumped into you at the American Probation and Parole Association, and I look forward to our next conversation. Be well, my friend.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It was really a pleasure to be here with you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And that concludes our profound conversation with Helena Pombares. It's not every day that we get to peer into the intersections of architecture and the justice system and truly appreciate the transformative power of design. Helena's insights remind us that every facet of our society, even the structures we build, play a role in our collective journey towards a more just and rehabilitative future. I hope this episode expanded your understanding and prompted reflection on the environments we create and inhabit. We are constantly surrounded by design decisions, and it's enlightening to realize how deeply they can impact human behavior, well-being, and ultimately, rehabilitation. A big thank you to Helena for joining us today, and to all of you for tuning in. And of course, a shout out to my fellow International Relations Committee members, in particular, Julie Trichel, Joe Winkler, and Patricia O'Hagan, who provide so much support in coordinating these amazing international subject matter expert interviews. We will be back next week with a fresh episode. In the meantime, you may contact the show or reach out to us through our website, the Paragon Group, LLC.com, for training or presentations as to core correctional skills, program design, or, of course, the topic of desistance from crime. In particular, our TIDES model, which Nicole Kimberly Staley and I have been working on, highlighting the intersection of trauma, desistance, all built on a solid risk needs responsivity framework. If you have questions or comments as to this podcast, feel free to contact the show via our email at thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. That's thecriminologistpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to follow us through our Facebook and Instagram pages at The Criminologist Podcast. New fun images are being added all the time to those feeds. You don't want to miss out. The Criminologist Media Group is also on Twitter, now known as X. Give us a follow at Crim Media Group. That's CRIM Media Group. You may also connect with me, Joseph Arvidsson, on LinkedIn and follow both the Criminologist Podcast and the Paragon Group on our LinkedIn pages. Hey, lastly, if you've not already done so, check out and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Criminologist, for additional content as to the themes of this podcast. And if you believe in what we're doing on the show, if you're part of the movement, please spread the word, tell a friend or a coworker or a colleague about us. Ask them to subscribe to the podcast And of course, do so yourself if you've not already done so. And always remember, folks, there's no them, there's only us.
So I had no idea what to expect. I had no idea where to go. At that point, I have never been inside or near any prison. So I thought, well, how difficult can that be? And how wrong was I? It is known that within the prison population, women have more and completely different criminogenic needs than men.
This has been a special APPA edition of the Criminologist Podcast. Their international relations team looks forward to sharing the insights of other subject matter experts from around the world in future episodes. The Criminologist Podcast is a production of the Paragon Group, LLC. For speaking engagements, interviews, program design, or training opportunities, please visit us at theparagongroup.llc.com. Be sure to give us a 5-star review, and thanks for listening.